Hello, this is the Tennessee Government Section 8 lecture. Our prioritized standard is Government Civics 28. Objectively, we're going to analyze the branches of the Tennessee government. Tennessee's legislative branch is called the Tennessee General Assembly, which is responsible for creating state laws. The Tennessee General Assembly is a bicameral legislature made up of the Tennessee House of Representatives and the Tennessee Senate. Members of the Tennessee House must be at least 21 years of age, have lived in Tennessee for 3 years, and must live in the district that they represent for at least 1 year. So this map shows the different Tennessee House of Representatives districts. So it's like most everyone is probably 32. Members of the Tennessee Senate must be at least 30 years of age, so considerably older, have lived in Tennessee for 3 years, and must live in the district that they represent, again, for at least 1 year. So here we go. So you are part of Senate District 12 then. Tennessee House members serve 2-year terms, while Tennessee Senate members serve 4-year terms. Both are actually paid about $19,009 a year. They earn $171 worth of a daily allowance per legislative day. Add all that up, that puts them somewhere around $35,000 a year, which means it's not a very high-paying job. The Tennessee General Assembly is actually considered a part-time legislature and only has 90 legislative days a year. So they are not there more than they are there, since they only work 90 days a year. The General Assembly can enact any law not conflicting with any federal law or any provision of the Tennessee Constitution. So that would probably put, again, state laws are going to be here, city counties are even lower, state constitution above that, and then congressional acts are going to be even higher because they are supreme to state and local laws. So the General Assembly, they have the power to tax, spend, borrow, establish courts, define crimes and their penalties, regulate commercial activities, and maintain public schools. They also have police power, which is the power to regulate behavior and enforce order for the betterment of health, safety, morals, and the general welfare of citizens. The General Assembly also selects constitutional officers of the Secretary of State, the State Treasurer, the Comptroller of the Treasury, when all of part of a joint session. We also have the sole power of impeachment of state government officials. The powers of Tennessee's executive branch is vested in a governor, which is currently Bill Lee, that is responsible for enforcing state laws and running operations of the state. Now, to be governor, one needs only be 30 years of age, be a U.S. citizen, and have lived in Tennessee for at least 7 years. You don't actually have to be a natural-born citizen in order to run for a governor. You can actually be born in another country, but you do have to be a U.S. citizen and have lived in Tennessee for 7 years and be 30. The governor is elected to a 4-year term and can only serve 2 full terms. That means only up to 8 years. It's not the 10 like the U.S. president, so they can only serve 8 years. They're paid roughly $194,112 a year. Our current governor takes that salary, although our last 2 governors, Bill Haslam and Phil Bredesen, were both independently wealthy before they became governors, so they actually opted to not take the salary. Now, if there is a vacancy in the governorship, the Speaker of the Tennessee Senate becomes the governor, which is sometimes also called the lieutenant governor. If for some reason the governor was out and the Tennessee Speaker of the Senate was out, then the next one in line becomes the Speaker of the Tennessee House of Representatives. Beyond that is the Tennessee Secretary of State. And then if you need another one, Comptroller of the Treasury. Anything beyond that, I guess it's like just a fight to see who gets to be. Tennessee's governor has several powers independent of the other branches of the state government. For instance, the governor appoints most state department heads and members of boards and commissions. The governor is also the commander-in-chief of the state's National Guard, except for when the National Guard is being called into federal service. The governor can also veto legislation, yet it should be pointed out that the veto can actually be overridden by a simple majority of both houses of the General Assembly. So you need to have at least 51 or 50% plus one more vote to pass in the first place, and that's the exact same margin that they actually need to override a governor veto. So the governor will rarely ever veto any type of legislation, since it's so easy to override that veto. However, if a veto is exercised after the legislature has adjourned for the year, the veto would actually stand. So that would be a pocket veto. Now, Tennessee does, however, allow for a line item veto, which means a governor could actually veto only certain parts of a law and not actually the entire law. So in that sense, that could make the veto a little bit more powerful in the instances that it is used. Governor may also recommend legislation and call special sessions of the General Assembly, and the governor may appoint judges and grant reprieves and pardons, except in cases of impeachment, but this is only for state offenses. It does not affect federal offenses. The executive branch delivers numerous services to its citizens with the assistance of 22 cabinet-level departments and other agencies. The departments help administer the state's policies dealing with things like the economy, healthcare, welfare, infrastructure, that's like transportation, law enforcement, and education. So a lot of these are going to have some overlap in the kinds of things that they affect, but that's the general areas of all the different types of agencies. The other agencies actually help perform important regulatory functions for the state. Tennessee's judicial branch is actually headed by the Tennessee Supreme Court, which, along with the state judiciary, is responsible for interpreting state laws. Now, there are 4 levels of courts in Tennessee, including the courts of limited jurisdiction, the trial courts of general jurisdiction, the intermediate appellate courts, and the Tennessee Supreme Court. Now, the courts of limited jurisdiction, this is the lowest level of courts in Tennessee that hear only certain civil and criminal cases, with cases decided by a single judge, including the courts of general sessions, which handle preliminary matters in major criminal cases and try minor civil and criminal matters, the juvenile courts, which are going to be the criminal or civil cases for juveniles, and municipal courts, which are sometimes called city court, which hear violations of city ordinances or other local issues. These courts are actually funded by the local counties or the municipalities that they actually serve. Now, above that is the trial courts of general jurisdiction. These are the state's trial courts that hear civil and criminal cases with a single judge. They allow for witnesses, and they are decided by a jury, including the circuit courts, which are going to hear the major civil and criminal cases and hear appeals from the courts of limited jurisdiction. Also, they have what are called chancery courts, which are civil trial courts dealing with things like divorces, adoptions, name changes, contract disputes. This also includes criminal courts, which are established by the General Assembly for areas that have very heavy criminal caseloads, and also probate courts, which are courts that deal with things like wills, estates, guardianships. Now, this is the starting point for most cases in the state, even though there actually is a level below that. This is actually where most cases actually start. So if you see here, this green area, that would include the judicial district for Roane County. Now, the intermediate appellate courts are even above that. They hear civil and criminal cases appealed from the trial courts, with cases decided by a panel of judges with no juries or witnesses, including the courts of appeals, which hear civil case appeals, and the courts of criminal appeals, which are going to hear, just like the name would suggest, appeals from criminal courts. Now, each of these courts has a grand total of 12 judges that are nominated by the governor and then are retained with a yes-no vote for 8-year terms by citizens. This is actually going to be the last step in the appeals process before they would reach the Tennessee Supreme Court, which brings us to the Tennessee Supreme Court, which is the highest level of courts in Tennessee that has the final authority over all state civil and criminal cases. So again, these are appointed by the governor. They're retained by yes/no vote for 8-year terms by citizens of the state. Now, the Tennessee Supreme Court is actually made up of 5 justices. Just like the appeals courts, they have no juries, they have no witnesses. Again, we already mentioned these are appointed by the governor after they're actually nominated by the Judicial Nominating Commission, and then they're confirmed by the Tennessee General Assembly, and then after that, they have to get voted for. Not more than 2 justices are actually allowed to live in any one of the state's grand divisions, which is intended to limit regional bias. Also, the justices on the Tennessee Supreme Court are retained with a yes/no vote for 8-year terms by voters. There's not actually a life term, but if a judge has good behavior and keeps getting reelected by voters, they could serve indefinitely. Also, the justices choose their own chief justice. The term varies. Currently, that would be Jeffrey Bivens. He is the fellow sitting down in the middle here. Now, the Tennessee Supreme Court actually meets alternatively in Knoxville, Nashville, and Jackson to hear appeals to criminal and civil cases from each of those areas. Meaning, if you need to go to the Tennessee Supreme Court, you would actually go to the Knoxville location. Not everyone is required to go to one central location, but they actually come to you to hear cases in the 3 different areas and parts of the state. Now, while the Tennessee Supreme Court must grant judicial review for cases involving the death penalty, criminal actions against attorneys, and also cases where the tenure of teachers is the subject matter, they can otherwise actually decide what cases they want to hear. So cases where the principal question involves the constitutionality of a state statute or needing a speedy decision may actually bypass the intermediate appellate courts and go directly to the Tennessee Supreme Court. They can actually declare state law unconstitutional if it violates either the U.S. Constitution or the Tennessee Constitution. So cases decided by the Tennessee Supreme Court can actually be appealed to the U.S. Supreme Court if it involves some type of federal law. But if it does not involve a federal law, they actually have the final word on all the legal questions that involve purely state law, though. All right, that concludes Tennessee Government Section A lecture. Our prioritized standard was Government Civics 28. Objectively, we're going to analyze the branch. You can now analyze the branches of the Tennessee government.